Good evening, Captain Retired Matt Edwards here with the next installment of my weekly observation post weekly reports. Try to keep it short as I have been doing lately and look back at some of the things lately, and I saw that I've been doing these videos for a couple of years now. Anyway, point number 146 in my draft ideas list that I posted a copy of on my files in my group. Veterans Affairs Canada's dole-dip clawback reduces compensation for personal injury in military service because of other, in brackets, income. But that is worse than reducing income because of other income, because it doesn't leave the veteran made whole. Now, to explain that, I have to back up the truck a bit and tell you what making whole is. If someone suffers damages, usually at the hand of somebody else, then the person who injured the other person has a duty, an obligation to make them whole, put them back in the place that they were before, as much as money can do. You can't roll back the time, you can't put them physically, or mentally into the place they were before, but you have to compensate them for their injury. Now, if you were getting income, and there was some program that wanted to reduce its payment because of other income, you might agree that that might be okay. But a person who gets hurt in military service is paid compensation under the Pension Act, if it was awarded before 2006, or compensation under the Veterans Wellbeing Act, if it was awarded after 2006. Now, compensation for personal injury is not the same as income. Your body is a capital resource. So if you get hurt, you get paid back in capital. You lose capital, you have to get capital back. So you can't compare income to capital because they're two different things, like, apples and oranges. So Veterans Affairs simply copied what the Service Income Support Insurance Plan, Policy 901-102, was doing. And all of these long-term disability policies across Canada, they all do this. So they think, because everybody does it, that it's okay. But that's not the way it works. If everybody's breaking the rules, if everybody's breaking the law, you can't get away with it simply because you're just doing what everybody else does. It's crazy. Point number 147. Canada Pension Plan Disability is supposed to provide help as of right, but whose right is it anyway? Now, the reason I pose that rhetorical question, it ought to be rhetorical, is because Minister Judy LaMarche, in February of 1964, was asked a question about, actually I should back out the truck, it might not have been that state I was just talking about, because that was when they talked about receipt of two different pensions. Like, was it okay? And Mr. Chatterton of the opposition asked the minister, what happens if a person is getting a Public Service Superannuation Act pension, and become disabled, will they also get a Canada Pension Plan Disability pension? And she said, yes, of course. But in the Granowski Supreme Court of Canada case, there was a mention of, when they were looking at the Canada Pension Plan, and I also looked up this, and it might be on or near the same date. The minister said that the Canada Pension Plan will provide help as of right for the disabled person instead of help as of need. Now, what she obviously meant is that when you apply for government programs, you have to have a need for them. But if you have a contributory pension that you paid into during your career, you don't have to have a need, you paid for it. So you get it. That's the way it works. So anyway, over the years, companies, insurance companies, and governments at provincial and the federal level, they have transformed this help as of right into help for the insurance companies and the government. Because the person who's disabled don't get their insurance in addition to the Canada Pension Plan Disability, because they take that into account just like they did with the Pension Act pension in the Dennis Manouche class action. Now, the government lost that case, and they're going to lose the other one because, as I mentioned in the first point, you're not allowed to reduce compensation for personal injury because someone has pensions and insurance. That's just a legal fact. So whether it's income or not doesn't matter, because if you're getting paid compensation, which is the Pension Act and any Veterans Affairs Canada payment, then you cannot reduce the compensation simply because the person is fortunate enough to have pensions and insurance. Boatwarelli versus Flanagan, Ontario Court of Appeal, 1973, is my reference. The judge said, and I'm paraphrasing a bit, that he didn't know of any equitable principle which would allow the person who did someone wrong to reduce how much money they paid in damages because the person had earned benefits. See? So what they're doing is using our earned benefits that you served to get, and they're using that against us. They shouldn't be allowed to do that because it violates the common law, and it also violates equitable law, which is different than legal law. Equitable law is about justice. Legal law is about technical legalities. Okay, point number 148. The Service Income Support Insurance Plan estimation of Canada Pension Plan Disability is awful. I think you'd all agree. Point number A, subpoint number A, different rules for both. Well, let me give you an example. The Canada Pension Plan Disability requires 4 out of the last 6 years to qualify to get Canada Pension Plan Disability. The Service Income Support Insurance Plan has no such period. Basically, you could get hurt the first day in service, and you would get your insurance, supposedly. That's one example. B, it errs on the side of harm. Now, what they're doing is they're trying to make sure that they save money for the people who are paying for the premiums. Now, that is 85% paid by the Government of Canada, and they want to save for the taxpayers. So any way that they can save money by clawing back this or clawing back that, well, they save money for the taxpayers. And in their mind, I bet you would agree with me, every dollar that they save for the taxpayer, that is a good thing for them, and they're not thinking of the harm it does financially to the person who should get their damages and their insurance or pensions. They're not thinking of the fact that it hurts the person who was serving Canada in the case of veterans. C, it assumes the future when it is impossible. See the point above. Now, what I'm getting at, because I was talking about estimation, I got off track a little bit and I was talking about clawbacks, but estimation of Canada Pension Plan Disability, to back up truck, that is when they say you should apply, usually you do, and if someone refuses, they estimate it, and they assume that you got approved, and they therefore start deducting it even though you don't have a payment coming from the Canada Pension Plan Disability to offset or to balance out their reduction. So it's a financial penalty. There's no way that you could justify this. To put it in layman's terms, they ought to cross the bridge when they come to it, because they're assuming that you're going to get to Canada Pension Plan Disability when the government, who administers the program on behalf of the contributor, they only approve 35 to 40% usually every year. Now that is a far cry from a contributory pension that you have a retirement pension that you're going to get for certain. That is entirely different because you have the 100% right to get your pension. But the disability portion of the Canada Pension Plan Disability, it should be a higher percentage, maybe close to 100%, which then might justify the insurance companies and the government estimating Canada Pension Plan Disability. But until it approaches 100% approval, they should not be estimating at all. It's a total breach of trust when you think about it. Okay, number 149, my rehabilitation, Veterans Affairs Canada rehabilitation failure. A, this is probably a recap of the facts. 13th of November 2012, I was accepted into the rehabilitation program. I wasn't getting SISIP at the time. Point B, late SISIP award in March of 2013. So I got out in January of 2012, and I didn't get my service income support insurance plan until March of 2013. So it's over a year. C, kicked off of rehab in August of 2013 for lack of participation, but I was in veteran SISIP rehabilitation, and there is a program arrangement, so I had to look it up, the terms. So Veterans Affairs is supposed to take the lead. Even if I was in the SISIP program's rehabilitation, the Veterans Affairs Canada is the case manager, is supposed to take the lead because you have two case managers. You have a Department of National Defense SISIP case manager, and you have a Veterans Affairs Canada case manager, and that could end up being a mess. So I think they have an agreement which one takes priority. Now, I ended up getting a letter from VAC, and VAC kicked me to the curb. And I'm sure they didn't care because, well, they weren't paying me any earnings loss benefit. So even though I was in the rehabilitation program, and you're supposed to get earnings loss benefit from Veterans Affairs Canada, and during the first 24 months, it's supposed to alleviate the financial stress of while you're in rehabilitation. But they didn't pay it to me. So I never had any relief of the aggravation. Now people might say, you got SISIP. Well, I went between January and 2012 and March of 2013 without SISIP, and SISIP doesn't compensate for anything because it's a non-indemnity and contributory insurance paid in accordance with a formula in a contract. A compensation from something is like if you went to court and you sued the person who hurt you, and the judge looks at your career and then they assess a lump sum amount and says, this is how much you owe this person, and using the Anders versus Grand and Toy Supreme Court of Canada 1978 case, they awarded 150% of what the guy made. He was making $800 a month in 1978, and they said everybody gets promotions and increases in their salary over the years, so we're going to use $1,200 a month, which is $400 more, which is $400 over $800, which is 50% more. Now, if you talk to the government and the Department of National Defense and Veterans Affairs Canada, they'll try to sell you a bullshit idea that you should only get a percentage. 75, 70, 90% of what you made before you got injured. But to get fully compensated for your injury, you have to get more than what you were making when you got hurt. That's the entire intent at the beginning for the permanent impairment allowance. They changed the name to the career impact allowance, and then they changed the name again to the additional pain and suffering compensation. But the original intent was to compensate people for their lost career opportunities, their promotions and seniority. Now, promotions are easy. It's going from one rank to the other rank. But seniority is moving from one pay level to another pay level within the same rank. A captain, for example, has 10 incentive pay grades, categories. So when you get the permanent impairment allowance, it is supposed to compensate you for the loss of your IPCs and your promotion from one rank to the other rank. And that, if they had done it properly, that would have, you wouldn't have had to get 150% earnings loss benefit, income replacement benefit, because you would have had a supplement that was supposed to do what they could have done in one simple payment. But they decided, in their infinite wisdom, to create a two-part payment. Why they did that? Who knows? But they decided to compensate two separate things. They decided to compensate people for their lost income, which is bullshit. You can't really do it. And you're supposed to get compensated for your lost capital, your body. How much injury to your body, right? You're not supposed to get compensated for something that isn't yours. Income isn't yours. Your body is yours. See? You can rent it out. You can go to work for somebody. You can serve somebody, and you can earn money. But they don't own you. You're not a slave. That's the difference. So if you get damages, if you get compensation for your injury, you get a payment of capital. Now that throws a monkey wrench into the government's idea, though, because the government calling it income lets them tax it, which reduces their payment, which reduces the taxes, which reduces the compensation paid to the veteran. See? You're not supposed to tax compensation for injury. Not as income tax. Income, you could try to tax it as capital, but you'd have to have a starting point, because a capital tax is paid on a profit. So if you bought a share for $1, sold it for $2, then you would have a easily calculated $1 capital gain, and you would pay capital gains taxes on the capital fucking gain. But if you get paid back for what you lost in an injury, it's supposed to balance out. You're not supposed to get any more than what you're owed based on a principle in common law called the compensation principle. The compensation principle says you cannot be compensated for more than 100% of what you lost. Be it a loss in contract or be it a personal injury loss, you cannot, in the law, get more compensation than you're owed. It's really simple, but they try to say, oh, you have an overpayment. For example, Captain Retired Denis Ouellette got a bill for $137,000 from earnings loss benefit overpayment, they said. So basically, they said they overcompensated him because they paid him SISIP at the same time. But remember, SISIP is not compensation. So he didn't get two forms of compensation. He didn't violate the compensation principle. And they never went to court to ask a judge if they could collect the money. They simply deducted it, and they started with, which shocked me, because he was part of the Dennis Manouse class action. One of the first things Veterans Affairs Canada did was deduct $1,020 from his Pension Act pension to satisfy the fucking debt. Tell me that strikes you as atrocious. He had been a class member where the government was taking the Pension Act and reducing his SISIP payment, and then when they said he owed money, because the SISIP payment came at the same time as the earnings loss benefit, they fucking took it off his pension. Okay? That is crazy. About why is any amount of pain and suffering compensation deducted from disability award? Because the disability award is alleged to be the same thing as pain and suffering. So the government in 2006 said they would split up the payments for damages, and they would pay the economic portion in the earnings loss benefit, the permanent impairment allowance, the supplementary retirement benefit, and all of those things. But it said it was going to split it off and make a disability award to replace the old Pension Act pension. Now, if you got another payment for pain and suffering for the same injury that you got the disability award, then I can agree that it would be well within their rights to reduce the disability award for the same amount because of the compensation principle. But who would be able to do, well, it's called heads of damages. So if you're getting another award for the same event, I would say that the chances of that happening are slim to fucking none. Okay? Slim to none. That you would get a civilian award for pain and suffering for the same thing that you're getting a military award for. Now I say that, but there's a BC veteran who was riding a bicycle, delivering documents in uniform, on duty, and he got hit by a civilian car. So that one is a possibility where, you know, if they sued the driver and then he won the lawsuit, therefore, you know, they could, if he got a disability award for the same event, that could be what you were talking about. They're not different things. Well, they're different legally, but they're not different in principle, according to their bullshit. See, I don't believe what they're saying is true. That's my problem. And people might look at me and say I'm being too cynical and I'm too, I don't trust enough. But you see, they said that the permanent impairment allowance was an economic payment, but the exceptional incapacity allowance, which is another payment under the Pension Act, they said you couldn't get both at the same time. But the Pension Act is for economic loss, and the exceptional incapacity allowance was stated to be for pain and discomfort. Now, if the exceptional incapacity allowance is a pain and suffering award, then it proves two things. It proves that the Pension Act is not for pain and suffering, because nobody pays two things for the same problem. So if you have a payment for pain and suffering and the Pension Act is it, that would be the end of it. But in the 1966 Woods Committee report, they recommended that they set up an exceptional incapacity allowance for people who could not participate in the workforce. And that was people who are 98% or higher under the disability scale, table of disabilities. So that came in, and that's still in effect for people on the Pension Act. So the thing is, you know, they're lying to us, okay? In a 2004 report, before they came out with the new Veterans Charter, they said we're examining the idea of repurposing the Pension Act to be for pain and suffering. Now, that proves, if they're looking at doing it, that it wasn't fucking doing it at the time. Nobody would examine repurposing it if its purpose was to pay for pain and suffering. Now, another thing I would add, because I've gone into this in depth and detail, but under that case I said before, in the Enders versus Grandin Toy case, 75% or 83% or something like that of the award was economic loss, and only 20% or so was for pain and suffering. Now, if the Pension Act was for pain and suffering, it would be a goddamned lucrative pain and suffering award. However, that would mean that the government would owe everybody getting the pension damages for economic loss, because it's supposed to be 5 times bigger than the non-economic part. So if you got $1 million, it will be $800,000 economic, $200,000 pain and suffering. Now, in their absurd, skewed logic, they tried to say the Pension Act's for pain and suffering. Well, if that was so, then you should put your hand out, if you're getting the Pension Act, and saying, thank you for the pain and suffering award. That's a really generous pain and suffering award. Now, where's my economic compensation, you pricks? But they're caught with their own lies, see? At least that's what I'm trying to do, because they shouldn't be allowed to lie with impunity. Taking something from the news, Putin is over there in Russia, and he's lying his fucking ass off to his own people. Kim Jong-un is doing the same thing. Some would argue that we're doing this in Canada, but I haven't been keeping up with it to a great extent. Maybe they are. But not with all-day, everyday state propaganda. We have a small problem where they're trying to confuse us with all these different stories and different things. And they haven't got a cohesive, whole here. Like, they're not, and they don't have an incentive to fix it. Because in order to fix it, they'd have to admit that they're doing it wrong. And to admit they're doing it wrong, well, that doesn't get them votes. That's my broad theory here about what's happening. Okay, point number 150. Analyze Keith's CFSA. Now, I think I might have saw him watching here. I put brackets around that because I wasn't sure if I was going to do it, or I don't know why I fucking put brackets around it. However, one of these days, I'll get a hold of him and I'll analyze the Canadian Forces Superannuation Act pension that he got after he was serving as a reservist. Yeah, I saw. That's why I mentioned it. And I'm presuming that it's not another Keaton, but I think it's you. Anyway, number 151. Analyze Tom's incorrect income replacement benefit from 2016 using the small amount that Veterans Affairs Canada paid. Now, it's really ironic because I don't look at my instant messages these days very much, but I saw Tom sent me a message either today or recently. Now, I only gave him the thumbs up, but I had this little note to myself that one of these days I want to analyze it and try to figure out how much he should have got. Okay? Like, I know what he should have got. What I mean is how did they figure out that he should have got $2 or $1.39 or something? Okay? Here's what the issue was. In 2016, the government said they were going to increase the earnings loss benefit to 90% from 75%. Now, some will say that's a 15% increase going from 75 to 90, and I will say it's a 20% increase because if you compare it in relation to the other payment, it's 15% is the increase over 75%, which is the previous amount. So that gives you 1 over 5 if you reduce it down mathematically, which is a 20%, 0.2. So when I was talking to Tom back in 2016, he said, Matt, listen, how much do you think I should get when they increases the earnings loss benefit? I said, how much are you getting now in SISIP? $4,000 a month. Okay, well, 20% of $4,000 is $800. So you should get $800 a month, Tom. When he got back to me, they gave him $1.39. Now that's a far cry from $800, isn't it? Right? So what formula? How did Veterans Affairs Canada come up with that $1.39, which it wasn't only Tom, okay? Because CBC did a story in July of 2017, and they did the story on how many people were getting the increase that Veterans Affairs announced. And they had a table there that showed how many people got whatever. Now, there was a few people got many thousands of dollars per month. I don't know the details. I presume they were entitled to it. But down at the bottom, there was hundreds of veterans that got the $1.39 that Tom got. So it wasn't an isolated instance. See? So somehow it was either human error or a computer program error or some kind of fucking error. They didn't pay him and hundreds of other people the right amount. The right amount according to me, at least. And anybody ought to be able to look at their previous payment and look at the increase, and then you have a legitimate expectation to get what they promised. Because they're the ones who brought this up. They are the ones who agreed to increase it. I mean, I'm sure people asked for an increase. I myself, back in 2015, sent a registered letter to the Chief of Defense Staff, and I gave him a specific direction according to National Defense Act Section 39.1, and I asked him to increase the service income support insurance plan to 85%. Now, why did I do that? Because it says that the Chief of Defense Staff in that law can do what he wants with non-public property, except in the case of a specific direction from a contributor. Now, having contributed to the program, I felt that I should do that, because people should get more than the 75%. I didn't want to do it just about my opinion, so I put a questionnaire in my Facebook group or on my homepage, and I think I used a petition or something, and I had a couple of hundred names. So it wasn't just Captain Retired Matt Edwards that asked for this. It was me representing all these other people. Now, I asked them also to go back to the lifetime payment, because from 1969 to 1995, the Service Income Support Insurance Plan, Policy 901-102, was a lifetime payment. Now, people might say that's not fair. The people approved before 1995, they have a lifetime payment. People approved after 1995, they only get it to age 65. They're right, it's not fair. Why isn't it fair? Because one group gets more than another group. That brings up an equity problem called intergenerational inequality. So you have one group that's in much the same position as another group, but one group gets more. What fool thought that they could get away with this? Now, they have gotten away with it for 27 years or something like this. But I think that we need to get back to the lifetime payment because we didn't vote to get rid of it. The reason I know about this lifetime payment getting canceled because it was in a 2005 Veterans Affairs Canada report, and it said that in order to save money in 1995, the government chose to get rid of the lifetime payment. Now, I've talked about this at length in previous broadcasts and previous correspondences and columns. I think they might have been floating a trial balloon. The pension is for life. They got rid of that in 2006. So first, they got rid of the lifetime SISIP payment in 1995, 11 years previously, to see what kind of stink it would raise. When it didn't raise any stink, they went ahead with the main plan. Now, I could be wrong, but it is an educated guess. Or it could be just that they're son of a bitches who don't seem to understand that you're not supposed to treat one group better than another group. It's called discrimination. Like, I don't see how the government can even try this and even think that they can get away with it. There's a thing called the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. The government is not above the Charter. The government is not above the law. So when they think about doing something, they ought to look at this and say, how are we on the Charter grounds if we do this? Like, can anybody make an allegation that we're breaching the Charter? If they do make an allegation that we're breaching the Charter, do they have a snowball's chance in hell of winning? Like, if you treat one group of disabled in-service veterans better than another group of disabled in-service veterans, then, yeah, there's a pretty good chance that Section 15.1 of the Charter has been breached. Because Section 15.1 says that you're not supposed to discriminate, like, against the disabled. So yeah, both groups of veterans are disabled, but one group is artificially, they have a dividing line in 2006. And anybody on this side of 2006, well, they get the Pension Act. Anybody on the other side of the 2006 artificial dividing line, they get the new Veterans Charter. And one group are getting treated better than the other group, and, well, which is better? That's a matter of opinion. Because some people would rather be under the new Veterans Charter, and some people would rather be in the Pension Act. See? So you can't please everybody, but you can piss everybody off. Because both sides can argue that, you're not getting treated fairly. I mean, you should be able to do it. Anybody should be able to do it. Somebody under the Pension Act, they can say, I got a payment for life, I'm better off. The person under the new Veterans Charter, he got a Pension Act pension for life, he's better off. I'm being discriminated against. See? You could look at the Pension Act and say, that's tax-free. Then the person on the new Veterans Charter is saying, I'm getting taxed. That's not fair. Why are we both getting treated differently? See? Anybody with a brain would try to treat people the same, because then you can't complain. Even if they're both treated badly. Then they don't notice the difference because they're getting treated the same. It's a cynical way of looking at it. But I'm sure you'd see my point. It actually, and I wish I could shut up sometimes, it reminds me of the equality with a vengeance problem. Okay, there was a guy single dad getting employment insurance, and there was an extra payment for being a single person, single parent. A woman got more money than a man. Went to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court said, and again, I'm paraphrasing, they said, listen, we can fix this in two ways. We can take the extra payment from her, or we can give the extra payment to him. Now, if we took it from her, that would be equality, all right. But it would be equality with a vengeance, because they'd both be equally bad off. Now, that's the way it's supposed to work. If you have a choice, you're not supposed to have people getting treated differently. And if you had to fix it, you fix it so they both get the right, better amount. You don't fix it by taking it away from both of them and then saying, well, you asked to get it to be equal. It's equal. You got what you asked for. Be careful of what you asked for. I hope you see my point, because I think the Supreme Court was right. Now, again, I wish I could shut up. But I've been wondering, how come the Supreme Court of Canada didn't look at the formation of this law and say, how did this law come to be? What stupid son of a bitch wrote this law and required it to go up through the system until it got before our court? And then we have to rule on it. Shouldn't they have thought about this equality with a vengeance when they were writing that law? Huh? Now, why did that fucking happen? In a perfect world, people would know their boundaries. They would know that, well, you can't write a law to cover something if you don't have the authority, for example. I'm thinking about that now because I heard of a new thing called, and I haven't looked it up much, so I'm not going to speak with authority on it, but I know the broad strokes. There's a new payment that I heard on the radio a week or so ago that said, oh, Canada has this thing called the Canada Disability Benefit now, and it's going to raise all of these disabled people up out of poverty. I said, what the fuck are they talking about? Are they talking about that one-time payment during COVID? Because that don't lift you out of poverty, one payment. So then I looked it up a tiny bit, and I saw that there's a law going through, and Bill C-22 and first and second readings have happened already, and they're going to supplement some other stuff like Canada Pension Plan and old age. But my thought, I said to my wife, I don't think they have the constitutional authority to write a welfare law. You can only make laws when you have the jurisdiction. And then a couple of days after I thought of that, another light bulb went off over my head, because I remembered that in 1997 or 1998, the federal government agreed with the provinces that they would write no more social welfare laws. So why is there, and I got to look up how this law came about, like who is it, what are they trying to do? But again, they seem to think that, oh, we can go ahead and do it. Well, if that was the case, why did the first old age security law get struck down because it was unconstitutional? Why did the first unemployment insurance law get struck down for being unconstitutional? Now, that's two examples in the 30s of the government thinking it had the authority, but it didn't. And the courts did its proper duty and oversaw, it's supposed to keep an eye on the other two branches of the government. So they shouldn't make these mistakes, but they sometimes do. I'm not going to say often, but sometimes they seem to make these stupid mistakes. Listen, I'm going to call her quits there. My eyes are going a bit blurry. 35, 40 minutes don't seem too bad. I keep saying I'm going to do it. One of these days, I hope that I'm not repeating myself too much. I'm going to try to go through my points here and then cut them down a bit, because, I don't want to keep dragging them out 6 every week. Anyway, thanks for watching. I'll see you next week.